morning, everybody. Good evening, good night, wherever you are. My name is Sebastian Thun. I'm joining here out of California as the co-founder of Udacity, and I have a really exciting and incredibly high caliber panel with me today. Let's start with Dr. Georg Kempf, who is Senior Vice President, Audi Engineering, and one of the people who really pushed the field forward over the years. Christoph Grote, he is the Senior Vice President, Electronics and Software of the BMW Group. We have Adam Yelushin, he's the Director of Human Resources, Global IT and Software Development in General Motors. And we have Alper Tekeli, who is here with us, not by camera, but by phone. He is Engineering Director, Vehicle Software and Electronic Systems at Ford Otosan. And just to start with a bit of a funny note, let me start with Christoph Grote. Christoph, I heard that you grew up without a television and now you're sitting in front of a webcam.
That's right. That's right. My mother was always really opposed to television because she hated when people could talk about something rather than do something. And that's been quite a forming experience, actually, because I still like to learn things so that I can do them, repair things, think things up, fail, rather than just talk about things, which is this kind of superficial learning, which is culturally endemic sometimes, I think.
And Adam, you name everything after Star Trek?
Yeah, so my cat, or our cat, is named Darth Vader, black cat, which happens to be female, so you know, a little bit of a misnomer there. And then our dog is named Obi-Wan Kenobi. So our family are self-professed Star Wars nerds. There's no doubt about that. And we had a prior dog whose name was Solo as well. So for Han Solo, it's our thing, I guess.
Okay. Well, I wanted to start on a funny note a little bit. So thanks for sharing those things with me. And I want to make this really fun. And fun means for me, short questions, short answers. Let's have a conversation. With us are four incredible leaders from the automotive field, have been with the field for a long time. They come from the technical perspective and the HR perspective. And they are probably the best people to ask the question, what has actually happened in the last 5 years and where is this field going? Maybe we start with Alper.
Within the last 5 years, I think we can say that major OEMs now have certainly more solid investment plans towards transition to electric vehicles. And of course, there's more focus on connectivity and software. The future is all about updatable digital experiences. Maybe we can say in-car infotainment for passenger vehicles and mission optimization for commercial vehicles. And all of this brings a new architectural approach. If you look at the software and electronics from software and electronics point of view, we see that hardware architecture is becoming more central, more powerful, but of course also bringing more flexible and modular software along with it to enable these quick updates and also in terms of the increased number of features on the vehicles. Actually, we see predictions like up to 30% of a vehicle's total cost is going to be driven by software and electronics within a couple of years. So this brings a lot of new ground for innovation. It's about, I think, you know, there's this famous problem, exploitation versus exploration.
I'm going to interrupt a little bit here because I want to get other people to speak as well. So, Christoph, does that mean that we have a culture clash between automotive engineers and software engineers?
I don't think so, you know, because we had this for a while, actually, that some of the software engineers would actually say, I'm not a dumb coder. And there'd be this kind of cultural war between the two, the guys that build functionalities, cool functionalities, and the other ones that should code them. We don't do that, you know, because I think really to combine the two things in one brain, you know, where you know what product you want to build, where you know your customer, you see what fails, you know, what customers just don't get to work, and then code it yourself and consider the code as, you know, your piece of work long term. I think that's more our belief. So in a nutshell, I don't think, apart from the occasional irritation, you know, when the software guys still need to have some things to do while the machine guys have done it. I think in general we're pretty integrated. I don't think we have that split at all, to be honest.
Yeah, I heard your CEO, the Volkswagen CEO, at some point say that he believes that Volkswagen should become a software company and that it has to rebuild the entire vehicle stack from scratch. Is that still accurate?
Yeah, I think it's building on what Christoph said as well. I think I'm looking at that in terms of, I like the word craftsmanship in this context. You know, we want to have engineers who build their tools by themselves, and we also believe that the verticality, so the integration of everything, the transparency, is paramount right now. Yeah, if we want to move on into autonomy, and that's what we're doing actually, right? So we have a firm belief in our company that we are betting on this. We want to be really early on this, and that requires a craftsmanship culture. It's not either a tech or a old auto or whatever culture. It's really bringing it all together in the sense that everything plays its role, really. Yeah. It's kind of immanent. There's a difference basically to the old OEM supply relationship, which doesn't work in this sense anymore.
Yeah, I can see that. I have to follow up immediately, Gary. You said you believe in autonomy. When I grew up, Volkswagen Group was all, and of course Audi, all about Fahrvergnügen, the pleasure of driving and empowering the driver.
That's us. Hey.
No, this is the other guys. I mean, we believe that autonomy is defines pretty much our future, let's say, identity and also our access to profit pools. Yeah, it's very deeply rooted in our strategy. Yeah, this is what we're doing this, and at the same time, we are not. We're building on what we have learned the hard way. You know, I mean, you've been a pioneer in this as well, so we're far beyond any hype in this regard. We're in it for the long run.
Yeah. Adam, you obviously run human resources, so you're the expert on understanding how to make people effective. What's your perspective on the strong impact of autonomy and software on the field right now?
Yeah, so you know, it's interesting. I mean, the acceleration or the pace of what's happened is just it's exponential. Maybe the best way to put it. If you go back just a couple of years ago and where we were, and maybe the reliance on ICE technologies and how the pivot has happened and what it's asking us to do from an acceleration standpoint. I mean, I'll give you a quick example. What we would do for hiring on entry-level employees from a college rank standpoint, and the percentage that we're coming from kind of core mechanical, electrical engineering backgrounds to where we are today. I mean, the reliance is on the software, computer science, you know, those kind of paths are becoming more and more important. But I think some of the comments here were spot on. Is in a lot of ways, it's a melding of all these different people. In a mechanical engineer is able to have software skills also. I mean, it's such a nuanced environment where you can gain software skills and you don't have to go to school for years to do that. Also, someone can learn how to code. They can get those additional skills fairly easily. They can go to boot camps. They can even go online, a whole bunch of different platforms where you can do that. Yeah, really interesting.
It's true. Absolutely true. Albert, look, I know that you're also a big enthusiast of racing drones. Is that correct?
Yes, Sebastian, that's correct.
So I happen to know that Alper is a real DJI enthusiast. He builds his own racing drones at home.
Yeah.
I think it's part of your COVID hobby, I understand. Anything we can learn from the drone field that would apply to automotive, or is it just too far apart?
Yeah, I'm interested in DIY stuff. I built 2-axis driving simulator at home for sim racing. The near future is about in terms of experience, mixture between physical and digital world. That simulator is something like that. So it's such a mix, and we see that a lot in the near future of automobiles. Until it becomes all software, it's going to be really a good coming up with a good balance between physical and digital experiences.
Okay, and now I'm going to ask the really hard questions. Okay, so I want you to sit down, have a glass of Kool-Aid, and help me understand where your companies will be 10 years from now. Like if you had a magic wand and say, we have our strategy and it's working. Let's start with Christoph for BMW.
Right. I think if you first look at, what's the product going to be like? And because, what people do and what skills we need, pretty much follows the product. And I think there'll be a few things, much earlier than 10 years that I think will be crucial. One of them is going to be, you always talk about digital cars, but really I think we should understand, the car very much as a swarm intelligent fleet. And to make that work, how do you crank that wheel of acquiring a hell of a lot of data from those cars, actually making use of that data to build functionality and deploy it kind of very short term. I think that's one of the big challenges. Who can do that well, I think, has a big advantage. I think the next one is natural interaction. I really love technology, but also, at BMW, we've always been Freude am Fahren, which basically meant, you don't want to lose that intuitive relationship to the machine. But what does it mean for digital interfaces? So building very natural digital user interfaces, that's going to be the next thing. Those are just two things, and I don't want to go into the future of quantum computer and security challenges that might impose. That's far out, and it still might have some impact till today. But I think that's more what drives me more is what do we have to do with respect to the people? Or what machine do we have to build in terms of should this company be like? And I think point number one really is that we need people that don't know to talk about things, but that do things themselves, that take true ownership over what they do. I said before, people should take ownership of the code because the code really is the product. And we don't, in the past, car makers have been building cars, start of production, a race to start of production, then next car, next generation. We're not going to do that anymore, I think. It's going to be a continuous stream of a software-defined product where people take ownership in shaping that. And I think that's maybe the most important thing. If we have a
okay.
Right.
Gerrit, what is your perspective?
In 10 years, I mean, there will be happening a few things along the way, I believe. So we do see a danger of deglobalization right now, which will basically heat up the competition in the EU and the US, I believe, right? And I'm one of the people who are believing that the Chinese tech stack will kind of depart from what's being used outside of China. There's a I mean, you might like it or not, but there's a high probability that this will happen. I think in the next 5 years there will still be probably no Apple car, so it's still time to work out what will be necessary, and this is where autonomy comes into the picture, right? So in 10 years time, I'm pretty sure we have a offering. It of course it's swarm based and everything and connected and all these kind of things, but it will be built around the capability to drive autonomously for quite a long time in an uninterrupted way, not just between tunnels and between traffic obstacles and so, but it will work, right? And we will have these cars. I mean, that's what we are actually where we're coming from. I came from the project Artemis, and we are setting out to exactly understand and build this car around that capability. And I think this is absolutely exciting. Yeah, this will be on our fingertips, in the future, in the next 10 years, right?
Okay, let me ask Alper, as the engineering director of Ford Otosan, what's your perspective?
I agree. I think we will see penetration of autonomous vehicles, and a real quick ramp up will follow once the technology is trusted. I see that within this time frame, shortages will also play a role, especially in terms of chips, lithium, and other changes with respect to supply chain due to global geopolitics. And that's going to also affect our design approaches. I also think that there is one big major challenge that traditional automotive companies are facing, that we have many design rules and standards, and these may sometimes limit creativity or innovation. So the startups in survival mode, they are right now challenging all of these. So it's very important to have creative people and experts who are flexible enough to bend the rules in a safe and secure way. So I think for classical automotive industry, this is similar to transitioning to playing jazz music with a symphony orchestra. That's how it seems right now.
I love the analogy, and it does bring me to back to Adam. So we have classically trained instrumentalists, musicians that are supposed to play jazz. What is the equivalent in education? If you had an 18-year-old kid just about to go to college, what would you recommend them to study today?
Yeah, I'd definitely say, computer science, electrical engineering, kind of those kind of pursuits are going to be where it's at, really and truly, and what's driving all of our companies. I mean, what we're all moving into in the piece de resistance, if you will, is the becoming a software and platform-based company, right? I mean, that's what GM is doing. That's where we're going. I know that's what everybody else is doing, and that's where you really unlock the value of all of our companies versus being a pure hardware delivery company.
What's the business model going to look for a platform company, and how does it differ from the hardware manufacturing company?
Yeah, what it means, if you look at the essence of the quality of earnings, it comes from software as a service, and those kind of pieces become very, very important as you move forward, and that's what software companies are based upon, and getting your revenues and EBIT from those avenues. Simple as that. So how do we do that? How do we become really customer centric and providing those kind of services? So the interface in the cockpit and what you're providing that others don't provide is the essential piece. So to that end, you need software people, right? In order to
look at GM, like in 10 years, what fraction of revenue is going to be like software licensing fees?
I mean, this is no surprise to everybody, but we have publicly put out there that by 2035 we're going to be all EV. What we're trying to do is really push forward the democratization of EV technology so that everybody can have an EV. Where we're at today is there's just not enough to go around. The average person can't purchase one. So how do you make EVs accessible and have cheap EVs for folks to drive? I mean, that's the critical piece.
Now I have to ask, so now that we're electric vehicle, and since I'm allowed to be a bit tongue-in-cheek, I have to ask either Gero or Christoph, how has the advent and rise of Tesla changed the automotive field, if at all?
Can I say something directly to Alper?
Yeah.
I'm not buying this jazz thingy. Absolutely not. I mean, I'm a jazz musician. I know what that means, but what I see definitely, if we go autonomous, right, it requires a very high discipline, yeah, and it requires to replace the players in the orchestra by an AI, yeah, which is highly responsive and does basically their fault analysis, their root cause analysis in an automatic way. I mean, a completely different picture. It requires much more discipline and detail on a systems engineering level in the true sense of the word, right? When we're talking about using formalized languages to specify, for example, we're talking about immensely quick CI/CD loops, right? We talk about control over data processes that are not, it's not enough to certify them. We need to control basically about every, let's say, learning step and all these kind of things. We need new kinds of matrices. We're looking into a new age of control in engineering, and basically a way of engineering which is starting really to replace humans by computers. Yeah, this is a completely different world, and this is what we're saying.
For you, it's more like replacing a couple of contract lawyers with brain surgeons. What is the analogy? You said you don't buy the classical and jazz analogy. No. What would be a good analogy?
Yeah, that's what I say. I mean, you have an orchestra basically manned by a basically infinitely large array of AI players, basically, of computers playing and reacting to what you as a conductor are basically doing. Yeah, and that requires a language for the conductor, which is much more powerful and much more detailed than just doing basically this, and it requires a score.
I think Adam was
a compiler that compiles the score into something that works in real time. I mean, there's more analogies to that really than to a jazz improvisation thingy, which might work in infotainment or whatever, right? Be quick, be agile, etc. We know the game, but you have faults as well there, and you need to be very quick in terms of deployment. We shouldn't forget that, right?
And can I maybe jump into that one and coming back to the, what would you advise your son to train in? I think software is a tool. It's in a way, I think we're beyond this age where you can say my skill is software, full stop. My son, for example, to pick that very example, he's a computational biologist. And I think that's, on the one hand, that combination where you've got the tool, somewhat specialized, and on the other hand, you've got that subject matter that also drives you. I think that's something, a piece of advice I would give anybody who's in that phase now. Yeah, to focus on biology only is, you don't get anything done anymore, forget it. If you just do software, then really, who are you? What do you acquire? What do you want to build? And therefore, I think it's that amalgamate. And jumping on that jazz and orchestra thing, there's just one aspect in that metaphor. I'm not sure whether we're on the wrong track here, but one aspect that matters to me a lot, and that's, Gero, you talked about, the car and the analogy of the car being somewhat of an orchestra that has to be coordinated and precise. Well, I agree with that, but also moving that image to people. I think some misconception sometimes is that software folks are solitary gurus, and I think that's certainly something that I very much focus on, to get people that are from their personality, from what they want to do, that like to think for themselves, like to work for themselves, but to work in larger teams and know how to interact with other people. I think those pieces are so big that we're building. We're always talking about tens of thousands of people building the products, if you count them, not just the people in your own OEM company, but if you take the whole stream in the industry and so on together, that you really need to people who love achieving something together. And that's not right for everybody.
Yeah, and maybe just piggyback on everybody else's comments, is that learning software today is not a static endeavor. So it's not something that's going to serve you for 5 years, 10 years from now. And we're talking about those kind of horizons. Yeah, you think about AI, for instance, and what that's going to do to just software development. Today, you're writing lines of code, but there's going to be technology where code will be taken to a certain point. So then what's the value of tomorrow's software talent? What are they going to provide? So again, that flexibility and learning is paramount to everything else, trumps everything else. But I totally agree, Christoph, is that you got to have a combination of things that you bring to the table.
We need to also work in such a way that we take ambiguity out of what people are producing along the way in the engineering process. I think this is very important. Otherwise, I mean, the task is still has to be automated. Otherwise, 10,000 people won't be enough. We do have a scaling issue in this, right? We need to really take people out of routine stuff, yeah, and make best use of their brains actually to get somewhere, right?
Mm-hmm.
All right, this is fascinating. Actually, it's a great discussion, because I always feel as we move from software engineering to AI, we don't need the software engineering skills as much anymore, because AI is kind of computers that program themselves based on data.
Right.
See Christoph shaking his head here.
I'm shaking my head in disbelief, of course, and I know you don't mean it, because for us it's clearly the basis is still a lot of what we do. I really realistically have to say is very traditional software, but we do use AI quite heavily. But I think if I look at it critically over time, then it's been very easy to get started with AI-based applications. But I think to really use AI in order to build dependable products, to build products, that can be homologated, that have a type approval, so to speak, to maintain AI-based products, to build AI-based products with a lot of people and still have control of what you've built is something that still has a lot of way ahead. And therefore, I would say, AI, if you come from university, if you've done a Udacity nano degree, and if you've had your first PyTorch Eureka personal experiences, that's one thing. But the other thing is to turn it with a large crowd of people into a cool product that works to a defined standard, and that's maintainable.
Okay, I'm going to ask a question again, and then I'm going to give it a positive slant, which is, when I first entered automotive 20 years ago, it felt that we were at a much slower innovation pace than we are today. And we're talking about topics today that I think we would never have thought talking about 20 years ago. I want to still ask the Tesla question, because I've seen Elon be focused on a big screen, on over-the-air updates, of course, linearly on electric vehicles and so on. How has Elon shaken up the industry, or is this an overstatement? How is Tesla being perceived? How does that feel right now? Anybody can take the question, please, or you can all take the fifth.
Maybe easiest for me. We are, in terms of EV sales, I think we're second to a Tesla now in Volkswagen Group. It's because we had a bold conviction that we needed to do it, not to be too late, right? And we are still struggling to get there. I think in terms of strategy, there's a lot to learn from Elon Musk, right? I don't want to comment on how we're looking at the. We're putting the safety of our customers at a very high rank. That's what we do. Yeah, this is probably one of the reasons why we are not on par or whatever. If you want to ever be there. So basically, I think we're setting out to surpass in the typical, let's say, German engineering way, with a brand that carries that.
Deserves to know there's been a recent NTSB investigation looking into over 500 deaths related to autopilots, mostly and Tesla side. And as much as I love Tesla, the autopilot has its challenges.
No, but in terms of EV engineering, they did a great job, actually. I think powertrain, battery, stuff like that.
Anyone else want to make a comment?
Hey, I'll just make a quick comment. You know, I think all of the automotive OEMs have been at EV technologies for a long time. There's a difference between that and big technology, maybe innovations that are coming out of, whether it's Audi, it's VW Group, it's BMW, it's GM. And you look at GM, we had the EV1 back in the 90s, but you know, we didn't see the market viability for it at the time. So, you know, it was small numbers. And I think it's at a moment in time now where this thing is accelerating, and you know, the financials are there, and what's going to happen is going to be big for everybody and where the world's going. And you know, we hit a critical mass time, I guess, maybe the best way to put it. But you know, Tesla is, I mean, they're a formidable player. There's no doubt about it. And I think it's going to be really interesting on where we go for things like the infrastructure. They've got their own charging infrastructure. Everybody else in the US particularly is going to use third-party system and what that infrastructure needs to look like. So there's differences there, and everybody will have the same kind of charger that you'll use. And you know, it's different paths. So again, this is going to be 10 years from now. The landscape is going to be very different than it is today, I think.
That's an interesting point about the charging infrastructure. It's certainly a big one here. Alpa has been very quiet, I assume because the video link is not working, but any thoughts you have?
You know, Sebastian, I was mentioning the exploitation versus exploration, the famous problem. I think Tesla's approach made us realize that the world right now is shifting towards exploration with the, I think, huge momentum because of the, I would say, enabling technologies, of course, and also the risk appetite and the chances for smaller companies or teams to win in this new environment. Tesla made a good strategy, and they were very constrained. I mean, they used their creativity under those constraints to come up with really new ways of dealing with old problems. And that made it difficult for the others because of their size, for all of us, I think, because we have to first get smaller and then revise our strategies maybe. So that's not an easy thing. But coming back to my earlier comments, I think we need to create environments within our companies so that people can feel creative enough. They feel constrained, but they have the room to make, let's say, such innovative ideas realize.
Okay, I'm going to change gear a little bit because we love to have fun. As you probably know, I work on flying cars or eVTOL. And when I ask you about 10 years from now, no one mentioned the word, oh, we're going to go fly. Is this like a crazy, crazy billionaire's like idea that's not going to work? Or what is the perspective of the automotive industry?
I like flying myself. That's why I didn't pick up on it. Don't take that joy away from me.
Oh, but where do you fly?
I was a glider pilot, but to be honest, I've stopped. I've got years and years of glider flying and a little bit of light aircraft, but I stopped. I had an ASW 15, was a really old German glider, and that was very manual. But I've stopped doing that now. I'm back to boats. But the joy of flying is still with me. But it was not a serious remark, Sebastian.
Yeah, that's fine. But you see companies like Lilium and Volocopter emerging in Germany, and here the States, Joby Aviation, Archer, Whisk, and of course Kitty Hawk. I would love
How's it going to scale? I think is an interesting question. Maybe to yourself. How do you perceive basically the bootstrapping of this between regulation, cities adopting it, some bits of infrastructure? How do you think it'll be bootstrapped, the whole scheme?
Lots of crazy challenges. Don't get me wrong, but so right now it's really just an idea. But the technology has been advancing to the point that at least some of us believe this is going to make a big difference in transportation. And it's not dissimilar from the way I felt in 2005 when we won the Double Grand Challenge and had the very first little self-driving car in the desert together with Volkswagen. But I hear from this panel that this is a question that people smile at a little bit and say maybe in 20 years.
No. I like the idea, just to out myself a bit here. Yeah, so I like the idea of autonomous drone flying. Yeah, and I believe it will. An interesting trajectory is to look at goods transportation first before putting people in. Yeah, and the second one is that, and we've seen this also in our commercial applications, that it makes sense to look at certain routes first and look at some infrastructure support for landing, especially for landing maneuvers. Yeah, this is what I believe in, but it's absolutely worth looking into it. What I'm not buying is, and I learned that from you guys when I was in Kitty Hawk, I don't believe in pilots, taxi pilots in eVTOLs. I think this is not creating any real business case. I think, and there might be some regulatory issues with that as well. Which
I have to agree with you, but that's the minority in the field believing this. If you look at the other.
I think it'll be a reality one day, right? The question is, when does that happen? And then a lot of the technologies that are being pioneered in the auto industry, I think will be key enablers, like the autonomous driving, those kind of pieces. It's the same kind of technologies, obviously, just above the ground.
That's very true. And the same is true for sensors, I agree, and for compute platform. Good. So I'm the only other question I can think about, but we can have an open discussion, pertains to education. I guess all of you have a little bit experienced Udacity, but also looked into your own people, your own staff that you need. Is there something that should the world move to lifelong education? Is this something that it should be high on the list of countries or companies? So is it something that's nice to have? Where do you come down with your experience?
Absolutely. I mean, let me just jump in because you really triggered me. I think so, absolutely. And I think, coming back to my traumatic, have no television experience when I was a child, I think the crucial thing is that lifelong learning is not just to get some stimulation later in your life when you're bored, but really to acquire skills that you can do something. And that's, I think, still a bottleneck, to be honest, because I think too few people actually dare and are being supported by their companies to actually acquire a skill that makes them productive, so that you don't tell somebody else what to do, or you can't show off just bragging that you know a few new words. That's a real disease, and particularly on the digital side. But people who love shaping things by having acquired a new skill and mastering that, and then Gero mentioned that, with a high degree of craftsmanship, also having that passion. And so I think, lifelong learning, Sebastian, I'm a big fan of that, and making lifelong learning practical, and having that, apprenticeship model also in there that tells you on real problems what you did well and what you could do better. I think that's key.
Yeah, I mean, when you say craftsmanship, Gero, if I look at my own university education, and obviously, I was a professor for many years. We don't really teach craftsmanship. We do not. We teach acing a homework assignment. We just recently witnessed a big email strain inside Stanford, where the computer science cohort has become so large that cheating is so rampant that professors can't keep up anymore. So we basically teach how to cheat. And we do not in a team. We do this individually, to be honest, at least in colleges like Stanford. You have any thoughts?
Not directly to that. I'm still, Christoph's remarks resonate a bit with me. So what I like is, first of all, associates who have some implicit motivation to learn. Yeah, I mean, you have to be a lifelong learner. That's the people I'm getting on with easiest, and it's easy to identify people who basically train themselves using Kaggle or any basically entry points where you can learn a lot by yourself. Yeah, and then they turn up and say, look, I want to do this nano degree or something like that, right? I like that a lot. Yeah, and this is a home run for me. Of course, we are having a transformation throughout the business, involving all levels or in the company. And the harder bit is basically to get into the people who don't have that mindset, right? And that's an open. I don't have a general recipe for that. Of course, we can set targets, and we do. Yeah, so we want to have a certain percentage. We have a plan. We're a German company. We have a target, and we work ourselves to that. This is the basically sweaty bit in retraining or transformation of a workforce. And what I think is we're pretty well underway with, let's say, engineers who have a craftsman's, if you use that again, a craftsman's skill already. Yeah, they work probably in combustion engines, looking at turbulent, dynamics in the engine or whatever, using simulators, using a Cray or whatever. These guys, you get them easily, right? We were talking about a tech and car company that we need to basically integrate, I think, yeah, earlier in the talk. And I think one of my wishes is basically that we also create transformation programs or Udacity programs, if you want so, where we can basically upskill line managers as well, right? And not in the sense of AI alone. We touched on that before. I mean, making an autonomous car, of course, requires some understanding of lots of things that are really novel and exciting, but it also requires a lot of discipline, as I said, or automation of things that we've done in the past with people, and we need to move them on to a higher value task. And this is something I would like to discuss with you, Sebastian, in the future a little bit more. And I'm sure every company today in the call and outside of the call would benefit from let's say, a more holistic, basically, approach for training up also the managers, right? Especially in the middle of the company, right? And that's what I wanted to say to that, basically.
Putting on my Udacity hat, message received. I'll talk to Gabe. Absolutely. And I agree. It's been a consistent piece of feedback we received. But Adam, your job is to really tease out the best out of people. You must have a unique perspective here.
Yeah, I mean, the comments are really insightful, and we're all struggling with or encountering the same kind of issues. You got environments within our organizations where you got this big bifurcation of skills, right, and what people are doing, and you got to think holistically about where you need to be in the future and who gets upskilled, who doesn't, who has the inclination, who doesn't have inclination, because there's a lot of people that don't want to do anything else either. So how do you identify that? But what you can't do is expect everybody just to navigate this themselves. That's not going to happen. It's never going to happen, at least from my experience. So how you put in place a really easy to navigate system where people are able to understand how they get those additional trainings, where the company needs to go, how they play a part into the goals of the company. I mean, that's one of the most important things, is you got to have a purpose-driven ecosystem in your company, and I know from our standpoint, we talk about the EV future, the the no emissions future, and that's really important to our employees. So how do you base the skills people need to attain to help us achieve that? But again, then you get down to the tactical piece. It takes a village in order to really put all that in place on, like, okay, where do we need to be 10 years from now, from a profit standpoint, and then you back up from that, what are the skills you need today, 2 years from now, 6 years from now, whatever it is, in order to make that all reality. So we're playing the long game here, and that means that we need a whole bunch of different alternative paths where we're getting people. So it's college degree people, it's experienced people, it's current people that are redefining their skill sets, and it's also people that go to a boot camp or go through Udacity and come out into valuable candidates for us to put to work. So we can't turn away from any alternative, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Mm-hmm. I have any thoughts on your
Full
end?
product is a good purpose. So that's, I think, what the car industry has to offer as a whole. It's a product you can identify with. It's a product that it's being transformed rapidly. And so it's not boring at all. And if that's the purpose that drives your own skill transformation, I think that's very credible, to me personally, at least.
It's certainly a massive change from my parents' generation, because my parents had one education, one skill, and then milked that skill for the rest of their lives. It seems that that is not the new normal. As Thomas Friedman puts it, the old normal was you got an escalator to the first floor, second floor, and you stayed there for the rest of your life. And the new normal is you keep running uphill and have to keep running to be able to stay there. Well, what else should we talk about?
The online learning. I agree with the comments, and I would like to give an example as well from our company. We really started from scratch 4 years ago, working on autonomous driving. And 2 years ago, we started working on level 4 systems. And we really benefited a lot from these online trainings and the information we did on the internet, particularly Udacity programs. Many of our employees got trained, reskilled, upskilled, and we were able to put a autonomous truck on public roads within 2 years. So we have seen that this is really possible if there is that curiosity, and as all in the comments, lifelong learning, purpose, with self-motivation. I think really this is a new world, and we really should pursue this more.
Good, thank you.
Hey, Sebastian, maybe a place that we could go, and I'd love to hear everybody's thoughts on it. Your thoughts is, a couple of years ago, obviously, with what happened with some of the social justice movement in the United States and what expanded around the world, and what that meant for what part do companies play in the communities that they exist. I mean, it's always been important, and there's always been corporate giving, involvement, those kind of pieces have been imperative to the mission of a company. But I think today where we find ourselves is really doing new and different alternative paths, like as it relates to the communities that we're in, and what we're trying to do with partnership with Udacity in particular, and scholarships and those kind of pieces are really, really cool and the right thing to do at the end of the day, right? So it provides a need for the company, but also the right thing to do, which again, back to this full circle, the employees care about that also.
Yeah, I mean, if you ask me now that I'm being interviewed, there's been generally a shift, I think, from power from governments to corporations. And I think people expect corporations to be more than just maximizing shareholder value at this point, especially given the political situation here in the States and worldwide. And we have a very, very nice set of scholarship programs that we've been pursuing, and have some really wonderful successes of people who now have an opportunity. We've also been working a lot with governments. We work with over 10 governments worldwide. The biggest is probably Egypt, where we trained over 200,000 people. Egypt has an interesting way to look at Udacity. It looks at very commercially and say, like, how many people can you train that bring in more money into the country? And I think after 1 year of working at Egypt, we increased Egypt's external revenue for freelancing by over $130 million a year, just by training freelancers in Egypt. And that kind of reminded me that education is still an inequity, that some have it and some don't have it. And those who don't have it don't get to play at the same level. That's something that Udacity certainly has been pushing very, very hard.
I think that's a role model, what you're doing there. Yeah, and of course, companies benefit from that as well, because they can access that pool of people. And we're considering most of these skills as being scarce anyways, right? Yeah.
I mean, I would come back to one point that Gero made. If I look at, for example, Udacity courses people take on BMW, and there's quite a few, Sebastian, as you know, and there's a strong introductory element, where people start learning a new skill. They do AI on top, or machine learning on top of some general software skills they've had before, and they've practiced for many, many years. I think one gap that is there, if you coming back to the apprentice model, if you've learned something, you've deployed it, you've built products, and then you're looking for, true mastership, and you basically want to be coached not on an artificial training project, which is a good thing, yeah, but on your real project, then I think there's still some space. Because I think we have a good environment here. We have a good culture where also senior software guys tell less senior software guys what they could do. People look at each other's code and all that. But there would be room for basically a training where if you're advanced, you still learn from something who's a true master, who looks confidentially, of course, and so on, at what you've done and what you could have done better, that you could use to consult, maybe if you run into a problem and know the question you should ask. If you see what I'm getting at, in terms of a space.
Yeah. BMW has, by the way, an outstanding job in organizing itself and having this kind of community internally.
Right.
The challenge for us has always been the confidentiality of the data, right? So
sure.
Obviously what you do is highly confidential. So but I concur. If we could scale up apprenticeship programs inside corporation, would be a great benefit for everybody, including the people who like to mentor. Like a certain age, people like to.
I have one remark to that, building on it. I think one other way to gain mastery in, let's say, not so confidential topics, and I think confidentially might be a little bit overrated anyways, but that's my personal point of view, right? I mean, we're talking basically about the open source paradigm, which is training people also to defend and show what they have done, and they expose themselves to reviews, right, regularly, and they kind of can move up on a ladder. I like that idea a lot. Yeah, it's not, but it basically builds on the idea that some of these things that we are currently doing concurrently, let's put it like that, they in the end they will be standardized anyways, right? I mean, there will be insurance companies coming in and say, look, why can't the stack X do the same as the stack Y, and etc. We will be driven towards standardization in the next step. So why not build some dependencies upfront around an open source paradigm? I'm personally attracted very much, and I think by this idea, and I'm interested in that. So we don't have anything up and running at the moment, but I think it makes a lot of sense to think that through, and also think about what can the best contribution of a company, an OEM, be into a open source community around autonomy.
Gero, you're really triggering me here, because I've been running around preaching that if you start writing code, or if you use open source code and branch from it because it's so easy to get started, think twice. Only do code that you really want to do in the long run on your own, and that's very little in my view. I violently agree with you, but there's somebody who earns more money than you in your company who had other ideas about it.
I mean, the
Apple
App Store is now, what, 15 years old, and I yet have a replica of that idea in the automotive sector. And Apple obviously has 100 times as many app developers as they have their own developers. So they have this incredible magnification of their workforce. And Apple is on the course.
Yes, exactly, right.
Yeah, they protect their IP, right? I mean, that's always what we fall back on. Yeah.
I think Gero's point is a good from a cultural point of view. If it's a general culture that you do contribute as a company and as a person to open source projects, that's one of the best drivers for quality and for pride in what you've been doing.
I just one comment in general here along the lines of what we're talking about is, I think one of the things that are maybe a key inhibitor is the old mindsets on how you do things as well. So overcoming those and being progressive in how we think about talent solutions, those kind of things, like what we're discussing with open source. I mean, you're really challenging the paradigms of what we have today. And when I think about like apprenticeships or how we pay people based upon attainment of a college degree, especially in the U.S., this isn't the fact in a lot of countries, but we should be paying people upon what they can do, the job that they do for us. So again, that's going to take a lot of work on winning hearts and minds to smash those paradigms. So, and you can't over or underestimate what a big undertaking that is.
That's true. I love where the discussion is going, because maybe the answer 10 years from now is all our software is going to be open source.
Quite a bit.
I think it's really important to basically build out a platform on that, and also to encourage smaller companies to grow in this environment. Absolutely. I think this will be manifest in 10 years latest, in the next 5 years, I believe.
Particularly if you have distributors, commercial distributors that, create a real product from open source. I think that could be a new paradigm in the industry that can really work. The only thing is everybody has got to have the same basic mindset that this would work.
How would you think about liability and safety in an open source world?
It's a reason for doing it.
Right.
Yeah.
I agree. It's a great answer. Because if I talk to my lawyer friends, they would say, oh my God, if my car is governed by a piece of software that comes out of, say, China or Russia, how can I guarantee that the brakes still work underneath them?
As I said, the insurance companies will look at it, and that they look at it already. Yeah, I mean, I took over a team that basically worked on the current Audi 8. There's a system in it that theoretically can do lots of funny things, but we decided not to release it actually, and that is quite remarkable, right? And I think we've been looking at quite a few risks along the way, and it always boils down, very often boils down to, well, how does an insurance see that in the end? Because it's about risk taking, and it's about reinsuring the liability that the OEM is taking over. It's as simple as that, right?
That'd be great. We could make that work with open source software.
Yeah.
We get to the end of our hour, and I'm going to be, as a German, I want to be punctual, as you know. The Germans here will do that. Any last thoughts from anybody here? Maybe take a look.
I really enjoyed that chat, honestly speaking. So thanks for the invitation.
Adam, any last words? Well, same. I just echo what Gero said. Really appreciate the opportunity to talk. I think it's been great in order to learn from everybody here, and hold on tight, right? Because I think we're entering into the great unknown here on a lot of like crazy cultural talent revolutions. So the future is bright.
Alpa, any last words?
Yeah. So it was very interesting discussion. Thank you for all the insights. I also think that, as I mentioned before, it's about exploration and being creative under the constraints of today, but regarding the opportunities in front of us. So we really need to rethink how we train our people, our, let's say, team members. So that ties very well to the topic of today. So we really need to continue thinking about this and really find even better ways. So thank you all, and thank you, Sebastian, for organizing this.
Thank you, Alpa. Christoph, any last words?
Right. Well, thanks to everybody. It was a good discussion, becoming very lively towards the end. And also thanks to the audience, and quite frankly, anybody out there who thinks that what I said resonates with their thinking, then I'm always happy to hear from you.
Yeah, and I want to say, I mean, I've on many discussions. This is the very first time that the word open source came up in a very provocative and very forward-looking way. And I would love your predictions to take place, because I could radically change. Gero, you said that secrecy is overvalued. Maybe that's just the case. Maybe insurance is becoming a big leveling platform. And if you could get an ecosystem to work where anybody can contribute to car software, where insurances and insurance tests become the leveling platform, and the automotive companies are the platforms that collect that and integrate it. That would be a game changer. That's a really
just a quick anecdote here. So my son is going to be going into computer science this fall. So he's going to enter into the School of Engineering and Computer Science. He quizzes me all the time on what open source do we do at GM, and I think in some ways believes that everything should be open source, and kind of disgusted with like what happens out there. But the point being, I think it's an expectation, really and truly, of the new generations coming through, is that it is going to be more open source. But to Gero's point, we're going to get forced that way to a large degree, I believe.
Yeah, that is a radical thought, I think, for automotive and for industry at large. Thank you, everybody. We are just on time. It's been an incredibly great panel. Thanks to the audience for attending, and hopefully you learned as much as I did. And thanks for Udacity for organizing it. Thank you so much.